Li Qing stood at the edge of the university courtyard, arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the spring breeze ruffle the pages of her textbook. It was a picture of peaceful student life, students chatting between classes, joggers weaving in and out of the foot traffic, the hum of late afternoon gossip echoing across the campus. If you didn't know any better, it could have been any ordinary day. But for Li Qing, it felt like the world was tilting off its axis. She glanced at her phone again, hoping for a notification from her best friend, Li Mei. Nothing. The silence was unbearable. So, in true Li Qing fashion, she did what she did best when nervous: she procrastinated. Her eyes wandered over the quad and she spotted a group of students laughing and tossing a frisbee. The thought of her upcoming genetic editing trial made her stomach churn, but she had already agreed to it. The contract had been signed, her consent given. She had signed up for something that could, theoretically, make her smarter, faster, stronger, perhaps even better than anyone else, but now? Now, she wasn't so sure. There was an unsettling feeling in her gut, a voice whispering, "What if this goes wrong? What if you're not you anymore?" Qing. The familiar voice rang out. Li Mei, in all her frantic, wind-blown glory, was rushing toward her, phone in hand, practically dragging a pile of textbooks behind her. "Are you seriously going through with this?" Li Mei asked, breathless, as she stopped in front of her. "You signed up for some sketchy, underground gene editing thing? They're going to turn you into a freak, Qing. Have you seen those before and after pictures? You know, the ones where people go in for extra strength and end up looking like mutant squirrels?" Li Qing rolled her eyes but smiled. She couldn't help it. There was something about Li Mei's indignant disbelief that always made her laugh. "Look, Mei," she said, shrugging, "it's just some harmless gene therapy. I'm just enhancing a few things. My brain, my reflexes. Nothing weird, I promise. Besides, I've heard it can help me focus better in class. No more falling asleep during lectures." Li Mei didn't look convinced. "You've been reading too many sci-fi novels," she muttered, scanning the courtyard as if looking for an escape. "I'm telling you, you're going to end up with some animal instinct like a cheetah, or a wolf, or something. And then you'll be chasing people around campus." And, before she could finish, Li Qing felt an almost instinctual surge of energy, the kind you get when you've been sitting too long and need to move. Without thinking, she took off running. And oh, what a run it was! Li Mei's scream was a distant sound as Li Qing's body blurred into motion, her legs propelling her forward like a force of nature. Her feet barely touched the ground as she zipped past startled students, knocking over a potted plant in her wake. She reached the edge of the courtyard before she even registered what had happened. "What the?" Li Mei's voice was swallowed by the wind, but Li Qing barely noticed. Her senses were in overdrive. Her eyes picked up the minutiae of the environment around her, the way the sunlight glinted off the glass of the nearby library windows, the faint trace of chocolate wafting from the student cafe. She could hear the sound of feet crunching gravel in the distance, the laughter of a group of students still far behind. Everything felt so clear, so alive. She should have stopped. She needed to stop. But she was already speeding toward a fountain at the center of the quad, her legs pumping faster than they had ever done before. She was almost there when, thud. She collided with a street vendor's cart, causing a heap of brightly colored bottles to cascade onto the ground. In her desperation to regain control, she leapt, yes, leapt, onto the vendor's table, knocking over a row of fruit cups. The vendor stared at her, mouth agape, as Li Qing scrambled to stay on top of the cart, her balance shot from the sudden rush of energy. Then, just as she was about to fall, something inside her kicked in, and she twisted her body mid-air, landing feet first on top of a nearby parked car. The students around her had frozen. Phones were out. Li Qing froze, too, realizing she was on top of the car, staring into the wide, shocked eyes of a couple who had just arrived. She blinked, her heartbeat racing. Sorry, she said, then promptly rolled off the car's hood and onto the sidewalk. As she stood up, dusting herself off, she heard a familiar voice. Ching. Are you okay? Li Mei was running up to her now, eyes wide with disbelief. You just ran across the entire campus, jumped onto a cart, and then leapt on top of a car. What the heck happened? Li Qing blinked and took a breath, laughing weakly. Okay, yeah, I didn't expect that either. But I'm fine. I think. Then it hit her. Something was wrong. Her heart thudded in her chest, not from the exertion of the run, but from the way her senses were still heightened. She could hear a distant bird chirping, feel the warmth of the sun on her skin, and there was something else. A strange, almost feral impulse crawling under her skin. Run again, the thought whispered in her mind. Hunt. She froze. Li Mei watched her nervously. Ching. Are you all right? I think I need to go home, Li Qing said, her voice low, her hands trembling. She didn't wait for her friend to answer before she turned and walked away, slowly at first, but then faster. She wasn't sure why, she just needed to run. By the time she got home, the impulse to run had faded, but the unease hadn't. It gnawed at her from within, a hunger she didn't understand. She stepped into her small, sparsely furnished apartment, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel like herself. Something is happening to me. She felt it in her bones. The gene editing trial was taking hold. It wasn't just her mind that was sharper now, it was something deeper, something primal. She sat down on her couch, staring out the window, lost in thought. Her body was on edge. She could feel her muscles coiled tight, her senses still humming, alert to every movement outside the window. Her phone buzzed. It was Li Mei again. Seriously, you need to tell me what's going on. This isn't normal, Qing. Li Qing stared at the message for a long moment before typing a reply. I'll be fine. Just need some time to figure it out. She set the phone down and closed her eyes. The world outside her window felt far away, as if she were no longer a part of it. She was something else now. Something other. Something dangerous. Li Qing tossed and turned that night, her mind restless. The strange feeling gnawed at her, but she couldn't put it into words. The heightened awareness, the sharpness of her senses, the ferocity inside her, it was all too much. Her heart raced every time she closed her eyes, as if something deep inside her was straining to break free. She had always been just Li Qing. The bookish, quiet girl who sat in the back of lectures and avoided confrontation. She liked the simplicity of that. She liked her ordinary life. But now, everything felt wrong, out of place. As if she wasn't meant to be here at all. By the time morning came, the restlessness hadn't faded. She had barely slept, her mind on edge, eyes darting around the apartment, almost waiting for something to happen. She glanced at the clock. 7:45 a.m. Her class started at 8 o'clock. She was supposed to meet Li Mei in the cafeteria first, but her body felt heavy, as if her instincts were pulling her in a different direction. Her phone buzzed, but she ignored it. She couldn't face Li Mei's constant questioning right now. Instead, she stood and pulled on a jacket. A cold wind greeted her as soon as she stepped outside, but it did nothing to dull the raw hunger inside her. She didn't know what she was hungry for, food, or something more. Something primal. The campus was eerily quiet as she walked across the quad. She noticed things she had never paid attention to before, the sound of the leaves rustling in the trees, the faint scent of coffee wafting from the student union, the soft murmur of conversation coming from a distant corner. Her mind sifted through it all, processing every detail with unnerving precision. But it wasn't just her senses. It was her body, too, tight, coiled, ready to move at a moment's notice. And then it happened. A squirrel darted across the path in front of her, its little paws scrabbling at the ground as it searched for food. Li Qing stopped dead in her tracks. Her eyes fixed on the animal, her pulse quickening. For a moment, everything else, the campus, the people, the buildings, faded away. There was only the squirrel, and the undeniable urge to chase it. Her legs twitched involuntarily. Her heart thundered in her chest, blood rushing in her ears. She could hear the faint patter of the squirrel's claws, its tiny, erratic movements. Her instincts screamed at her to chase it, to catch it. She took a step forward, then another. The squirrel froze, sensing her presence. Li Qing's breath came faster now, her vision narrowing. She was almost there, just a few more steps, and a voice broke through the haze of her mind. Qing. She blinked, startled. Her body froze as if someone had pressed pause on her. It was Li Mei, standing a few feet away, staring at her with wide eyes. What the hell is wrong with you? Li Mei demanded. You were about to chase that squirrel like an animal. Li Qing shook her head, disoriented. I didn't mean to. It was just, she stopped herself, swallowing hard. I'm not sure what's going on, Mei. Something's happening to me. Li Mei took a step forward, concern in her voice. You're scaring me, Qing. This isn't normal. Maybe you should stop with this gene editing experiment. It's messing with your head. Li Qing frowned, rubbing her temples. The urge to hunt, the hunger, had not dissipated. I can't just stop now. It's already started. I can feel it. Something's changing in me. Li Mei hesitated, her face torn between worry and disbelief. This is insane. You're talking like you're losing your mind. Li Qing felt a surge of frustration. She didn't want to feel like this. She didn't want to be some animal. But the pull was undeniable. The gnawing sensation deep within her, the ferocity that wanted to break free, it wasn't something she could just ignore. The squirrel's twitching form was still etched in her mind. I'm not losing my mind, Li Qing said, her voice tight. I'm just changing. I don't know how to explain it. Li Mei looked at her for a long moment, a mixture of fear and sympathy in her eyes. Finally, she sighed. Fine. If you're sure, but at least let me take you to the doctor. We need to figure out what's going on. Li Qing nodded absently, but deep down, she knew it wasn't a doctor's help she needed. It wasn't medicine that could fix this. It was her. As they walked to the campus medical center, Li Qing couldn't shake the feeling that her body was no longer entirely her own. The strength in her limbs felt foreign. The sharpness of her senses, the way she could hear the rustle of leaves from yards away, the distant hum of traffic, it all felt heightened. Too much. As though she were seeing the world through a predator's eyes. When they reached the medical center, Li Mei ushered her inside. They were met by a receptionist who directed them to a small examination room, where they waited for the campus doctor to arrive. The room was stark and sterile, its white walls doing nothing to ease the tension in Li Qing's body. Every moment felt like an eternity. Finally, the door opened, and a middle-aged doctor entered. He was friendly enough, but Li Qing couldn't shake the feeling that he was just another piece of the experiment, another cog in the machine that had started all of this. Good morning, he said, looking at Li Mei and then Li Qing. What brings you in today? Li Mei opened her mouth to speak, but Li Qing beat her to it. I'm experiencing some side effects from the gene editing trial, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I think I'm losing control of myself. The doctor nodded, motioning for Li Qing to sit on the examination table. We've been monitoring the progress of the participants in the study, he said, his tone clinical. But we've never had someone report symptoms like yours. Li Qing clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. What symptoms? She asked, her voice tight with frustration. What's happening to me? The doctor's face softened slightly. It's possible that the enhancements you've undergone are triggering certain primal instincts, elevated aggression, heightened senses, increased strength. But we've never fully studied how the animal traits might affect behavior. It's new territory. Li Qing took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. What do I do? How do I control it? The doctor glanced at his notes, then back at her. You'll need to undergo a more intensive round of tests. There are therapies we can try, but the truth is, we don't have a definitive solution yet. Li Qing stood up abruptly, her patience wearing thin. What good is that going to do me? I can't just sit around while I turn into some kind of animal. The doctor blinked, clearly taken aback by her outburst. Please, calm down. We're doing the best we can, but Li Qing was already out the door, her footsteps fast and purposeful. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want the tests, the therapies, or the reassurances. All she wanted was to feel normal again, to reclaim the parts of herself she was losing to this experiment. She walked out into the sunlight, the warmth of it doing nothing to cool the fire burning inside her. And that's when she saw him, Xie Kai. Another subject in the gene-editing trial, and someone she had noticed only recently, but never paid much attention to. Until now. He stood a few feet away, leaning casually against the wall of the building, his dark eyes trained on her. There was something about him, a quiet confidence, an air of someone who wasn't quite human anymore. Li Qing's instincts flared. He smelled different. She could hear the steady rhythm of his breath, feel the power coiled in his body. He was like her, a hunter. He took a step toward her, his expression unreadable. You're struggling, aren't you? He said, his voice low and smooth, like he already knew her pain. Li Qing's fists clenched, but she held herself back. What do you want? Xie Kai smiled, a sharp, knowing grin. I think you're beginning to understand. You don't need to fight this. You just need to embrace it. Li Qing's heart skipped a beat. She felt the pull toward him, the need to give in, to let the beast inside her free, but something else, something human, fought against it. I don't need you, she snapped, turning on her heel and walking away. Xie Kai didn't follow. He didn't need to. She already knew he was right. The animal inside her was awakening. And there was no turning back now. Li Qing could feel Xie Kai's words echoing in her mind as she walked away. Embrace it. She gritted her teeth, refusing to let them sink in. She didn't want to embrace this, whatever this was. She didn't want to become a creature of instinct, a slave to some primal urge she couldn't control. The fear of losing herself was overwhelming, like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest, but there was something undeniable about what he said, something she couldn't shake. The more she tried to reject it, the stronger the pull became. It was like a chain, invisible yet unbreakable, tying her to something deep inside her, a force that felt as ancient as the earth itself. She couldn't escape it, not anymore. She could feel the raw hunger inside her, tugging at her every waking moment, whispering that she was more than human now, that she was something else. She headed back to her apartment, but even the familiar surroundings didn't offer her any comfort. The walls felt too close, the silence too heavy. She couldn't sit still. Her thoughts raced, her pulse quickened, her body hummed with energy, desperate for release. She needed to move. Needed to feel the world around her in a way that only running could give her. Without a second thought, she bolted out of her apartment and down the stairs, her feet barely touching the ground as she sprinted through the streets. She didn't care where she was going. She just needed to run. The city passed in a blur, streetlights, pedestrians, storefronts, all became mere shadows, indistinct shapes caught in the periphery of her vision. Her body moved on its own, driven by a hunger that no rational thought could satisfy. She felt herself breaking away from the girl she used to be, the girl who had once worried about exams and awkward social interactions. That girl didn't exist anymore. Now, she was something else. Something faster. something stronger. She barely registered when she crossed into the nearby park. The familiar scent of earth and grass should have calmed her, but instead, it only heightened her senses. She could smell the sweat of a jogger nearby, hear the faint rustle of birds in the trees, feel the hum of life all around her. Everything was sharp. Too sharp. Too loud. Too alive, and then, in the distance, she saw it, a rabbit, hopping through the tall grass, oblivious to her presence. Her heart skipped a beat. It was just a rabbit, but in that moment, it was prey. It was food. It was something she needed to hunt. She didn't think about it, she didn't hesitate. Her body surged forward, the ground beneath her feet becoming nothing more than a blur. She could feel the wind against her skin, her muscles rippling with power, each step eating up the distance between her and the rabbit. For a split second, she thought she might stop, that the sheer absurdity of the situation would snap her back to reality. But then the rabbit darted to the side, and the instinct inside her flared. She was no longer thinking. She was just moving that her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She lunged, and before she even realized what was happening, she had the rabbit in her grasp. It thrashed in her hands, but she held it with unnatural strength. For a moment, she felt a rush of triumph, a sense of power that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. But then, just as quickly, the elation turned to guilt. She looked down at the small animal, its body trembling in her grip. What am I doing? The rabbit's terrified eyes stared back at her, and the reality of the situation hit her all at once. She wasn't supposed to be like this. She wasn't supposed to be someone who hunted innocent creatures without a second thought. But it had felt so natural. So right. She closed her eyes, willing herself to calm down. Slowly, she set the rabbit back on the ground, watching it scurry away into the underbrush. Her breath was heavy, her hands shaking. She had almost crossed a line she wasn't sure she could come back from. She stood there for a long moment, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on her. The world around her felt different now, more vivid, more intense. She could still hear the rabbit's heartbeat, feel the remnants of the struggle in her own body. She could almost taste the wildness that had taken over her, a hunger that was now so deeply embedded in her that it would never go away. Is this what I'm becoming? The thought lingered in her mind as she began to walk back toward her apartment. She had to get a grip on herself, regain control before she lost everything. But she couldn't ignore what had happened. She couldn't ignore the truth. The more she resisted it, the stronger it became. She was changing. And she wasn't sure she could stop it. When she got home, she immediately headed to her bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. Her reflection seemed different. Her eyes were darker, her features sharper. She wasn't imagining it. Her body had changed, in ways both subtle and obvious. She was stronger. Faster. Her mind, too, was sharper than ever before. She could see everything with new clarity. Details that used to be insignificant were now impossible to ignore. The subtle shift in the light as it filtered through the blinds. The faintest creak of the floorboards beneath her feet. The way the air smelled, clean, fresh, alive. This isn't normal, she thought, her hand gripping the edge of the sink. But the truth was, she didn't know what normal was anymore. Suddenly, there was a knock at her door. Li Ching's pulse spiked at the sound, her body already on edge. She hadn't even realized how tense she was until now. She opened the door, and Li Mei stood there, looking more worried than Li Qing had ever seen her. "Qing, we need to talk," Li Mei said, her voice quiet but urgent. "I've been doing some research. I don't think you fully understand what's happening to you." Li Qing stepped back, allowing her inside, but her mind was elsewhere. Her instincts were on high alert, every nerve in her body humming with tension. It was as if the animal inside her was ready to burst free at any moment. "Research?" Li Qing asked, her voice distant. Li Mei nodded, biting her lip. The gene therapy, it's been tested before. They said it could enhance physical abilities, right? But what they didn't tell you was that it also taps into instinct. The base animal instincts that we all have, but are suppressed by our brains. The therapy amplifies them. And it's happening to you, Qing. You're losing control. You're becoming more animal. Li Qing felt the blood drain from her face. She had already known, deep down, that something was wrong, but hearing Li Mei say it out loud made it real. Too real. I'm not losing control, Li Qing said, her voice shaking despite herself. I need time. I can fix this. I can stop it. Li Mei's face softened, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. You can't fix this alone, Qing. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than both of us. For a moment, Li Qing was quiet, the weight of Li Mei's words pressing down on her. She had been trying to hold it together, to ignore the wildness growing inside her, but it was no use. The more she fought it, the stronger it became. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Li Mei stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do it alone. Let me help you. We can figure this out together. Li Qing looked up at her friend, but all she could see was the truth of what had already happened. She wasn't just changing. She was becoming something else, something that might never fit back into her old life. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she knew that part of her already embraced it. The question was no longer whether she could stop, but whether she wanted to, and deep down, she wasn't so sure she did. Li Qing sat down at the kitchen table, her fingers drumming on the smooth surface. The silence in the apartment was deafening. Li Mei's words echoed in her mind, and she found herself unable to shake the unease that had settled in her chest. She wasn't sure anymore if she could go back to the way things were before. The more she thought about it, the more she realized she didn't want to. The pull of her instincts had become undeniable. It was like an itch deep inside her that couldn't be scratched. Every time she tried to push it down, it resurfaced, stronger than before. The wildness inside her was growing, and it wasn't going to be ignored. She glanced up at Li Mei, who had taken a seat across from her, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. It was clear that her friend didn't understand, not fully. Li Mei still saw Li Qing as the girl she'd always been, the bookworm, the quiet one who kept her head down and her nose in the books. But that girl was fading. Li Qing could feel it slipping away, piece by piece. What are you going to do? Li Mei asked softly, breaking the silence that had settled over them. Li Qing didn't know how to answer. What could she say? That she was starting to lose control? That the instincts inside her were becoming stronger than her rational mind? That she could feel her humanity slipping through her fingers like sand? She shook her head, unable to articulate it. How could she explain something so far beyond her understanding? It wasn't just her senses that had sharpened, it was everything. Her thoughts felt clearer, more focused. But with that clarity came an unsettling awareness of how much she had changed, how far she was drifting from the person she had been. I don't know, Li Qing finally said, her voice quieter than she intended. I just don't know anymore. There was a long pause as Li Mei studied her. I think we need to go to the lab. Talk to them. They have to know what's happening to you, Qing. Maybe they can fix it. Li Qing felt a pang of frustration. How many times had she heard the same thing? Fix it, they'd always said. But what if it couldn't be fixed? What if this was who she was now? I don't need them, Li Qing said, her voice firm, though her hands trembled slightly as she placed them on the table. I don't need anyone telling me what's wrong with me. I know what's happening. I feel it. Li Mei's eyes softened with sympathy, but there was something else there, fear. She was scared for Li Qing, but she was also scared of what Li Qing might become. Li Mei didn't understand that, in some strange way, Li Qing had already embraced the change. Maybe not fully, but she was no longer rejecting it as she had before. I'm not like I was anymore, Mei, Li Qing continued, her voice strained. I'm not sure I want to be. The words hung in the air between them. Li Mei looked like she was about to say something, but she hesitated, clearly at a loss for what to say. Li Qing could see her friend's struggle, her desire to help, but also the fear creeping into her expression. It wasn't just fear for Li Qing anymore, it was fear of what Li Qing might do, what she was capable of. I'm still me, Li Qing added quietly, more to herself than to Li Mei. But I'm also more than that. I can feel it inside me. Something, untamed. Li Mei opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the apartment door suddenly slammed open. Both girls turned in shock as Xia Kai stepped inside without so much as a knock. His presence filled the room instantly, as though the air itself had shifted with his arrival. Qing, Xia Kai said, his voice low and smooth, you're not going to be able to run from this forever. Li Qing's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying to ignore the feeling, the way her body tingled whenever Xia Kai was near. There was a magnetism to him now, a force that she couldn't deny, something wild and raw that pulled her in. Why are you here? Li Mei demanded, standing up, her voice sharp with protective instinct. Xia Kai didn't even look at Li Mei. His gaze was fixed entirely on Li Qing. I came to help you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was no mistaking the intensity behind his words. You know this is happening. You can't deny it anymore. I can feel it in you. Li Qing swallowed hard. She wanted to push him away, to tell him to leave, but the truth was, she was drawn to him. She couldn't explain it, but there was something undeniable about him. Something that resonated with the part of her that was changing. I don't need your help, Li Qing said, but her voice lacked conviction. Her body had already betrayed her. She felt the shift inside her, a pull toward him she couldn't resist. Maybe not now, Xia Kai said, stepping closer. But you will. Because, deep down, you know that I understand what you're going through. The hunger, the rage, the need to break free. Li Qing's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She could hear his words, but it was like they were laced with something dark, something seductive. Her instinct stirred beneath her skin. She wanted to deny it, but the more she fought against the feelings he was awakening in her, the stronger they became. What do you want from me? Li Qing asked, her voice barely more than a breath, the words slipping from her lips before she could stop them. I want to help you embrace it, Xia Kai said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. The beast inside you doesn't need to be a curse, Qing. It can be power. It can make you stronger. Faster. Untouchable. No, Li Mei interjected, her voice rising with panic. This isn't you, Qing. Don't listen to him. Li Qing turned slowly toward Li Mei, her chest tight. There was a part of her that wanted to shout, to tell Li Mei to stay out of this, but another part, an animal part, wanted to lash out. She could feel the tension coiling inside her, the need to assert herself. I'm not the same as I was, Li Qing said, her voice colder now, more distant. And I'm not going to pretend that I am. I'm not a victim of this, Mei. I'm becoming. She felt Xia Kai's gaze on her, intense and knowing. It was almost like he had been waiting for this moment. He had been waiting for her to accept it. You don't have to be afraid, Xia Kai murmured, his voice low, almost coaxing. I can show you what you're becoming. I can help you control it. Li Qing glanced at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the animal part of her wanting to reach out to him, to connect with him. But something deeper, something more human, told her to hold back. She wasn't ready to give up the last of herself. You don't need him, Qing, Li Mei said, her voice trembling now, pleading. You're stronger than this. Li Qing didn't answer. She couldn't. The conflict inside her was too strong. Her mind, Her heart, her instincts, they were all at war. For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of heavy breathing, the silence between the three of them almost suffocating. Li Mei's eyes pleaded with her, but Xia Kai's presence was a force she couldn't ignore. She felt like she was being pulled in two directions at once, back to the girl she had been, the life she had known, and forward into something she couldn't understand but was already becoming. Finally, she stood. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as she looked at both of them, Li Mei, who was full of worry and fear, and Xia Kai, who seemed to exude an almost predatory calm. "Maybe I need to see where this leads," Li Qing said, her voice resolute, though her chest felt tight. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know what was happening to her, but one thing was clear: she wasn't going to turn back, not now. And as she walked toward Xia Kai, the world seemed to shift just a little more underfoot, the air feeling thicker, charged with something she didn't yet understand but couldn't escape.